Have you ever wondered what secrets lie buried beneath the pristine facades of small-town America? What dark histories remain untold, whispered only between those brave enough to speak of them? The story I'm about to tell you has been carefully suppressed for generations, a haunting chapter in American history that few dare to acknowledge. Before we begin this journey into darkness, I'd like to ask you to comment where you're from. It helps me understand which forgotten histories resonate most with my viewers. And please, if you find value in these obscured tales being brought to light, subscribe to help this channel continue to uncover the secrets that powerful forces would rather keep hidden. In the autumn of 1896, the small town of Blackwater Creek, Texas, was experiencing an unprecedented period of prosperity. The railroad had finally reached their isolated community, bringing with it new opportunities for trade and growth. Nestled in the eastern part of the state, where the piney woods created a natural boundary between civilization and the untamed wilderness, Blackwater Creek had always maintained an air of insularity that bordered on suspicion toward outsiders. The town had been founded by 5 prominent families in the early 1830s, and their descendants still controlled much of the wealth and influence in the region. Among these founding families were the Caldwells, the Prestons, the Thorntons, the Blackwoods, and the Millers, names that commanded respect and deference throughout the county. When the Carroll sisters arrived in Blackwater Creek in September of 1896, they caused quite a stir among the townspeople. Josephine and Annabelle Carroll were identical twins in their early 30s, elegantly dressed in the latest fashions from back east, with porcelain complexions and auburn hair typically worn in tasteful updos that accentuated their delicate features. The sisters claimed to have traveled from Boston following the untimely death of their father, a successful textiles merchant who had left them a modest inheritance. They had chosen Blackwater Creek, they explained to anyone who inquired, based on the recommendation of a distant acquaintance who had spoken highly of the town's growing potential. Within days of their arrival, the Carroll sisters had secured accommodations at the home of Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, a respectable widow who supplemented her income by renting rooms to suitable ladies. The Whitfield residence was a handsome 2-story Victorian on Magnolia Street, just 3 blocks from the town square and conveniently situated across from the First Baptist Church. "They were the most refined ladies I'd ever encountered," Mrs. Whitfield would later tell investigators. "Their manners were impeccable, and they always paid their rent promptly. They kept to themselves mostly, though they were unfailingly polite in conversation. I never once suspected what they were really planning." The Carroll sisters wasted little time in establishing themselves in Blackwater Creek society. They attended church services regularly, made generous donations to local charities, and graciously accepted invitations to various social functions. Their natural charm and sophisticated demeanor earned them the admiration of the town's female residents, while their undeniable beauty drew appreciative glances from the men. What few people noted at the time was how strategically the Carroll sisters distributed their attentions. While they were cordial with everyone they encountered, they showed particular interest in certain gentlemen in town, specifically widowers of means who possessed valuable properties. The first to fall under their spell was Jonathan Miller, a 58-year-old banker whose wife had succumbed to consumption 3 years prior. Miller owned not only a substantial homestead on the edge of town, but also held the deeds to several prime commercial properties on the town square. He was considered one of Blackwater Creek's most eligible widowers, though he had shown little interest in remarriage until Josephine Carroll began calling at his bank on various pretexts. "I remember thinking it was odd how frequently Miss Josephine needed to consult with Mr. Miller," recalled Thomas Hargrove, a teller at the Blackwater Creek Savings and Loan. "Sometimes she'd come in just to inquire about interest rates or to exchange a few dollars for coins. But Mr. Miller always seemed pleased to assist her personally, often inviting her into his private office, where they would remain for half an hour or more. By mid-October, Jonathan Miller and Josephine Carroll were often seen taking evening strolls through town, and it surprised no one when he began escorting her to Sunday services. Their courtship proceeded with remarkable speed, and by early November, Miller had proposed marriage. During this same period, Annabel Carroll had been cultivating a relationship with Ezekiel Preston, a 62-year-old widower who owned the largest cattle ranch in the county. Preston had lost his wife to a riding accident 5 years earlier and had been raising his 2 teenage sons alone since then. The boys, Caleb and Joshua, aged 17 and 15 respectively, were away at a boarding school in Austin during most of the Carroll sisters' time in Blackwater Creek. Father seemed completely transformed after Miss Annabel entered his life, Caleb Preston would later testify. He had been a stern, practical man for as long as I could remember, but his letters became almost youthful in tone. He wrote of plans to renovate the ranch house and spoke of Miss Annabel as though she had brought light back into his world. By Thanksgiving, both Carroll sisters were engaged to be married, with a double wedding planned for December 23rd, just before Christmas. The rapid nature of these courtships raised eyebrows among some of the more conservative townspeople, but most viewed the romances with benevolent approval. After all, both Miller and Preston had endured years of loneliness, and the Carroll sisters seemed to bring them genuine happiness. What no one in Blackwater Creek realized was that Josephine and Annabel Carroll were not the refined Boston socialites they claimed to be. In fact, they weren't even Josephine and Annabel Carroll. Their real names were Martha and Mary Dawson, born to a sharecropper family in rural Georgia in 1863. The twins had fled their impoverished home at 16 after their father had attempted to marry them off to 2 elderly neighbors in exchange for the forgiveness of debts. The girls had made their way to Savannah, where they initially found work as seamstresses, but soon discovered more lucrative opportunities in separating wealthy men from their money through various confidence schemes. By the time they arrived in Blackwater Creek, the Dawson twins had perfected their method. They would target prosperous widowers in small towns across the South, ingratiate themselves into the community, orchestrate whirlwind romances, and then disappear with whatever valuables they could acquire, leaving broken hearts and empty safes in their wake. What made the Blackwater Creek operation different was its scale and ambition. Never before had the twins attempted to snare 2 of the wealthiest men in a community simultaneously. Their plan involved not just theft of portable valuables, but the acquisition and transfer of land deeds and banking certificates, a scheme that required careful timing and the creation of false documentation. The pivotal moment in their plan came on December 15th, just 8 days before the scheduled double wedding. On that cold, clear morning, Josephine called at the bank to discuss the marriage settlements that Jonathan Miller had generously proposed. These documents would grant her partial ownership of his properties immediately upon their marriage. "I just want to be sure I understand everything correctly, Jonathan," she said sweetly, as they sat in his office, the door closed for privacy. "These papers mean that the Westfield property and the buildings on Main Street would be partly mine after the ceremony." "Indeed, my dear," Miller replied, beaming at his bride-to-be, "and upon my death, they would pass to you entirely. I want to ensure you're well provided for." "You're so very thoughtful," Josephine murmured, lowering her eyes demurely. "Might I keep these papers to review more carefully tonight? Annabel has a much better head for business matters, and I'd value her opinion." Miller readily agreed, handing over the documents that detailed not only the properties in question, but also their assessed values and the legal language that would transfer partial ownership to his new wife. What he didn't know was that the Carroll sisters had already secured similar documents from Ezekiel Preston regarding his ranch and business interests in town. That same evening, the twins received an unexpected visitor at Mrs. Whitfield's boarding house. Sheriff William Blackwood, a taciturn man in his late 40s who had served as Blackwater Creek's law enforcement for over a decade, requested to speak with them privately. "I'll be direct, ladies," Sheriff Blackwood said, once they were seated in the small parlor that Mrs. Whitfield reserved for her boarders' visitors. "I received a telegram today from the sheriff's office in Natchez, Mississippi. They're inquiring about 2 women matching your descriptions in connection with a series of confidence schemes across Mississippi and Louisiana." The Carroll sisters exchanged a brief glance before Josephine replied, her voice steady and indignant. "Sheriff, there must be some mistake. We've never even visited Louisiana, and our time in Mississippi was limited to passing through on our journey from Boston. Perhaps these women merely bear some resemblance to us." "Perhaps," the sheriff acknowledged, studying their faces carefully. "But the telegram mentioned twin sisters using various surnames, including Barrett, Collins, and most recently, Carroll. They're wanted for questioning regarding the theft of property deeds and valuables from several widowers." "How perfectly dreadful!" Annabel exclaimed, pressing a handkerchief to her lips. "To think that such unscrupulous women exist, preying on vulnerable gentlemen. No wonder you felt compelled to investigate." "We understand completely," Josephine added. "In fact, we insist that you pursue this inquiry to clear our good names." "We have nothing to hide, Sheriff Blackwood." "I'm glad to hear it," the sheriff replied. "In that case, you wouldn't object to postponing your wedding plans until this matter is resolved? Just as a precaution, you understand." This was the moment their carefully constructed facade began to crack. A postponement would give authorities in other states time to respond to inquiries, potentially exposing their true identities and their history of similar schemes. "That seems rather extreme, Sheriff," Josephine protested, her smile tightening. "Our fiancés would be terribly disappointed, and we've already sent invitations to our few relatives back east." "Just a few days' delay," Sheriff Blackwood insisted. "If your identities are confirmed as legitimate, you can proceed as planned." After the sheriff departed, the twins knew their time in Blackwater Creek had suddenly grown short. They had planned to execute their final scheme after the wedding, but circumstances now forced them to accelerate their timeline. "We leave tonight," Martha, using the name Josephine, whispered to her sister once they were alone in their room. "We have the documents from both men. We can forge the transfers and be gone before morning." "What about the jewelry?" Mary, as Annabel, asked. "The Preston diamonds alone are worth a small fortune." "Ezekiel showed them to me just yesterday. His wife's entire collection, intended as a wedding gift." "We can't risk it," Martha replied. "The sheriff will be watching us closely. We take the documents and whatever cash we have on hand. We can be in Shreveport by morning if we catch the midnight train." But Mary was not so easily dissuaded. The Preston diamonds represented the largest potential score of their criminal career, a collection of jewelry accumulated over 3 generations of Preston marriages, including several pieces that had been brought from England when the family first immigrated to America in the 1770s. "The old man keeps them in a wall safe behind a painting in his study," Mary argued. "He trusts me completely. Showed me the combination just yesterday when he was explaining which pieces he wanted me to wear for the wedding. We can't leave such a prize behind." After heated debate, the twins reached a compromise. They would split up for the first time in their criminal partnership. Martha would take their forged documents to the county clerk's office in the neighboring town of Liberty Hill first thing in the morning, filing them before news of their deception could spread. Mary would visit the Preston ranch that night under the pretense of discussing wedding arrangements and would secure the diamonds. They would rendezvous at the Liberty Hill train station the following afternoon, where they would board a train to Shreveport and from there continue east. Their fortunes significantly increased. As darkness fell over Blackwater Creek, Mary Dawson, still known to the town as Annabel Carroll, borrowed Mrs. Whitfield's buggy for what she claimed was a surprise visit to her fiancé. She arrived at the Preston ranch just after 8 o'clock, when the ranch hands had retired to their quarters and Ezekiel Preston was likely to be alone in the main house. "Annabelle!" Preston exclaimed when he opened the door to find his bride-to-be standing on his porch. "What a delightful surprise. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, darling," she assured him, stepping inside. "I simply couldn't wait until tomorrow to see you. I've been thinking about our future home together and had some ideas I wanted to discuss." Ezekiel Preston was clearly pleased by her enthusiasm. He led her into his study, where a fire blazed in the hearth against the December chill. As they talked, Mary gradually steered the conversation toward the wedding itself, and specifically the jewelry he had promised her. "I was wondering," she said, her voice soft and hesitant, "about your grandmother's sapphire necklace. You mentioned it would complement my wedding gown perfectly, but I realized I've never actually seen it. Might I look at it tonight, just to help me envision how everything will come together on our special day?" Preston beamed at her interest. "Of course, my dear. I'd be happy to show you the entire collection again." He crossed to a large oil painting of a Texas landscape that hung on the wall opposite his desk. Swinging the painting aside revealed a small metal safe set into the wall. As he dialed the combination, Mary watched intently, mentally confirming the sequence of numbers she had memorized during her previous visit. When the safe door swung open, Preston removed a large leather case and placed it on his desk. "The Preston family jewels," he announced with pride, opening the case to reveal an impressive collection of necklaces, brooches, rings, and earrings nestled in velvet compartments. Over 120 years of family history represented in precious stones. Mary gazed at the collection with genuine appreciation. By her expert estimation, the pieces were worth at least $20,000, a fortune that would allow the twins to live comfortably for years, perhaps even retire from their criminal activities altogether. "They're exquisite," she breathed, lifting a diamond and emerald necklace from its compartment. "May I try this one on?" "Of course," Preston nodded, moving to stand behind her as she faced a small mirror on the wall. His fingers brushed her neck as he fastened the clasp, and Mary forced herself to suppress a shudder of revulsion at his touch. "Perfect," he murmured, his hands lingering on her shoulders, "as though it were made for you." It was at this moment that their intimate scene was interrupted by a sharp knock at the front door. Preston frowned, clearly annoyed by the disturbance. Who could that be at this hour, he wondered aloud, as he left to answer the door. Mary didn't hesitate. The moment Preston left the study, she quickly gathered the jewelry case and snapped it shut. She was searching for something to carry it in when she heard voices from the entrance hall, one belonging to Ezekiel Preston, the other unmistakably that of Sheriff William Blackwood. Panic surged through her. Had her sister been caught? Had their scheme been exposed? She had only moments to decide her next move. Mary's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route. The study had large windows that opened onto the side yard of the ranch house. If she could slip out undetected, she might still make it to the rendezvous with her sister. She unlatched one of the windows and pushed it open, wincing at the slight creak of the hinges. Cold night air rushed in as she hoisted the jewelry case through the opening, then prepared to climb out herself. But she had underestimated the sheriff's suspicions. Just as she was halfway through the window, the study door opened, and Ezekiel Preston stood there with Sheriff Blackwood close behind him. "Annabelle!" Preston's voice was confused, hurt. "What are you doing?" "She's stealing your family jewels, Mr. Preston," Sheriff Blackwood said grimly, drawing his revolver. "Step away from that window, Miss Carroll, or should I say Miss Dawson?" Mary froze, her mind racing. The jewelry case sat on the ground outside the window. If she moved quickly, she might still escape, though it would mean abandoning the jewels. In that split second of hesitation, Ezekiel Preston's expression transformed from confusion to rage. He lunged forward, grabbing Mary's arm with surprising strength for a man of his age. "You deceived me," he hissed, yanking her roughly back into the room. "Made me believe you loved me." What happened next would become a matter of dispute in the official records. According to Sheriff Blackwood's account, Mary Dawson broke free of Preston's grip and reached into her dress pocket, withdrawing a small Derringer pistol. In the ensuing struggle, the gun discharged, the bullet striking Ezekiel Preston in the chest. Yet according to the sole ranch hand who witnessed the aftermath, the sheriff himself had fired the shot that struck Preston after the older man had begun beating Mary Dawson in a fit of rage upon realizing her deception. Whichever account was true, the outcome remained the same. Ezekiel Preston collapsed to the floor of his study, blood spreading across his white shirt, his eyes fixed in an expression of betrayal and shock. He was dead before the local doctor could be summoned. Mary Dawson was taken into custody immediately, still protesting her innocence in Preston's death, even as she confessed to the planned theft. The jewelry case was recovered from beneath the window, its contents intact. Meanwhile, across town, Martha Dawson was unaware of the tragic turn of events at the Preston ranch. She spent the evening meticulously forging signatures on the legal documents they had obtained, creating transfer papers that would assign ownership of various properties to fictitious cousins in Georgia, who could later sell the lands and forward the proceeds to the twins at a predetermined location. It wasn't until Sheriff Blackwood and 2 deputies arrived at Mrs. Whitfield's boarding house shortly before midnight that Martha realized their scheme had collapsed entirely. She was arrested without resistance, her forged documents seized as evidence. The Carroll sisters' deception was fully exposed the following day when telegrams arrived from authorities in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Georgia, confirming their true identities and their history of similar crimes across the South. The citizens of Blackwater Creek were scandalized by the revelations, and Jonathan Miller faced particular humiliation as details of his whirlwind romance with a known confidence woman became public knowledge. The trial of the Dawson twins for fraud, and in Mary's case, the murder of Ezekiel Preston, was scheduled for February 1897. They were held in the county jail in Liberty Hill, as Blackwater Creek's small jailhouse was deemed insufficient for such notorious criminals. It was during this period of incarceration that the story of the Dawson twins took its most bizarre turn, one that would transform their case from a simple confidence scheme gone wrong into one of the most disturbing chapters in East Texas criminal history. On January 10, 1897, 3 weeks after their arrest, the jailer, making his morning rounds, discovered Mary Dawson's cell empty. The door was locked, the window still barred, but the prisoner had vanished without explanation. A thorough search of the jail and surrounding areas yielded no trace of the missing woman. "It's as though she simply evaporated," the baffled jailer told reporters from the Liberty Hill Gazette. "I saw her myself at the evening check, and this morning she was gone. No signs of tampering with the locks, no disturbed earth beneath the floors, nothing." Suspicion immediately fell on possible accomplices within the jail or the local community, but no evidence of outside assistance emerged. Martha Dawson, still securely imprisoned in an adjacent cell, appeared genuinely shocked by her sister's disappearance and could offer no explanation. "We've been together our entire lives," she reportedly told Sheriff Blackwood during questioning. "Mary wouldn't leave without me. Something has happened to her, something unnatural." 5 days after Mary's inexplicable disappearance, Jonathan Miller was found dead in his home on the outskirts of Blackwater Creek. His body was discovered by his housekeeper, who arrived that morning to find the front door standing open despite the January cold. Miller's corpse lay in his bedroom, positioned as though he had been sleeping when death came. There were no signs of violence, no indication of forced entry, and nothing appeared to have been stolen. The county coroner initially ruled the death the result of natural causes, citing heart failure as the most likely explanation. This conclusion might have stood unchallenged had the housekeeper not mentioned a peculiar detail to Sheriff Blackwood during her interview: the faint scent of lilies that permeated Miller's bedroom. This was the signature perfume worn by Josephine Carroll, Martha Dawson's alias, during her time in Blackwater Creek. It was unmistakable, Mrs. Perkins, the housekeeper, insisted. Miss Carroll always smelled of lily of the valley. Mr. Miller had commented on it more than once, said it reminded him of his mother's garden, and that room was filled with the scent, strong as if she'd just been standing there. The sheriff immediately ordered Martha Dawson's cell searched. The prisoner still sat securely behind bars, seemingly as confused by Miller's death as everyone else. No perfume bottle was found among her possessions, and the jailer and his wife both testified that they had detected no floral scent when bringing her meals. Yet, as January gave way to February, the strange occurrences continued. 3 more men died under mysterious circumstances in Blackwater Creek and the surrounding area. All of them widowers, all of them wealthy property owners, all of them found dead in their beds without signs of violence or struggle. And in each case, witnesses reported the distinct scent of either lily of the valley or rose water, the preferred perfumes of the Carroll sisters, lingering at the scene. The most disturbing case was that of Henry Blackwood, the sheriff's own cousin, and a prominent rancher whose wife had died in childbirth 7 years earlier. He was found dead on February 3rd, his body unmarked save for a single detail that the coroner initially overlooked, a small, perfect kiss mark in what appeared to be red rouge on his right cheek. When analyzed, the substance proved not to be cosmetic rouge at all, but human blood. By this time, panic had begun to spread through Blackwater Creek. Rumors circulated that the Carroll sisters, or the Dawson twins, as they were now known, possessed supernatural abilities that allowed them to pass through locked doors, to be in 2 places at once, or even to separate their spirits from their physical bodies. "They're not natural women," declared Reverend Thomas Harkins of the First Baptist Church during a special service held to address the community's fears. "They've made some unholy pact to gain powers no mortal should possess. We must pray for divine protection against their evil." Even the more rationally minded citizens began to wonder if there might be some truth to these fantastic claims. How else could Mary Dawson have escaped from a locked and guarded cell? How could these deaths occur without any sign of intrusion? And how could the distinctive perfumes of the Carroll sisters be present at each scene when Martha remained imprisoned and Mary was nowhere to be found? Sheriff Blackwood, a practical man not given to superstitious beliefs, struggled to maintain order as fear gripped the community. He doubled the guard on Martha Dawson's cell and ordered that no one, not even the jailer's wife who brought meals, should enter without another officer present. Despite these precautions, on February 12, 1897, Martha Dawson also vanished from her locked cell. As with her sister's disappearance, there was no explanation for how she had escaped. The cell door remained locked, the windows barred, the walls and floor intact. Her few possessions, a hairbrush, a Bible provided by the prison chaplain, and a change of clothing, were left behind, neatly arranged on her cot. The only clue, if it could be called that, was a small handwritten note found tucked into the pages of the Bible. It contained just 5 words: "We will have our due." The disappearance of both Dawson twins intensified the climate of fear in Blackwater Creek. Citizens armed themselves, and few ventured out after dark. Widowers in particular sought safety in numbers, with several moving in with married relatives or friends, rather than remaining alone in their homes. These precautions proved insufficient. Between mid-February and early March, 7 more widowers died under identical circumstances, found in their beds, apparently unharmed save for the telltale kiss mark now reported on each victim. In every case, witnesses reported the scent of lilies or roses at the scene. By March, the situation had attracted attention beyond East Texas. Newspapers in Dallas, Houston, and even as far as New Orleans carried stories about the kissing killers of Blackwater Creek, or the phantom sisters who seemed able to strike at will despite all efforts to protect their targets. Several investigators from larger cities offered their services, and a representative from the Pinkerton Detective Agency arrived in early March to assist local authorities. None were able to provide a rational explanation for the deaths or the disappearances. It was at this point that Jonathan Miller's attorney made a startling discovery. While reviewing his late client's papers, he found a legal document that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. A transfer deed signed by Miller just days before his death, assigning ownership of several valuable properties to a woman named Eleanor Whitfield. Mrs. Whitfield, the very same widow who had rented rooms to the Carroll sisters during their time in Blackwater Creek. When confronted by Sheriff Blackwood, Mrs. Whitfield initially denied any knowledge of the document, but as the investigation deepened, more connections emerged. Similar property transfers were found for other victims, all benefiting either Mrs. Whitfield directly or her previously unknown relatives in Georgia. The respectable widow's background came under scrutiny, and it was discovered that Eleanor Whitfield had arrived in Blackwater Creek just 18 months earlier, claiming to be from Savannah. No records confirmed this history, and no one in town had known her before her sudden appearance and purchase of the boarding house on Magnolia Street. Most damning of all, when authorities searched her residence, they discovered hidden compartments beneath the floorboards of the room the Carroll sisters had occupied. These spaces contained various items: bottles of expensive perfume, cosmetics, wigs, documents with practiced forgeries of multiple signatures, and, most disturbing, a journal written in a cryptic shorthand that, when finally deciphered, detailed a systematic plan to acquire property from wealthy widowers throughout Blackwater Creek. The journal made no explicit mention of murder, but it did contain a list of names, all men who had died under mysterious circumstances over the previous 2 months. Next to each name was a precise description of their properties and their estimated worth. Eleanor Whitfield was arrested on March 15, 1897, charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and suspected complicity in multiple murders. She maintained her innocence throughout her interrogation, insisting that she had merely been a landlady to the Carroll sisters and knew nothing of their criminal activities. "Those women," she reportedly told Sheriff Blackwood, "were not what they appeared to be. There was something wrong about them, something I sensed but couldn't name. They would whisper together late into the night in languages I'd never heard before. Sometimes I thought I saw 3 or 4 women in their room when I knew only the 2 sisters had entered. I was afraid to ask questions." While Eleanor Whitfield awaited trial in the same jail from which the Dawson twins had mysteriously escaped, the murders in Blackwater Creek abruptly ceased. No more widowers were found dead in their beds, no more phantom perfumes were detected, and no further sightings of the Carroll sisters were reported. The case might have faded into obscurity, remembered only as a bizarre chapter in local history, had it not been for a shocking discovery made in April 1897 at the abandoned Thornton Mill on the outskirts of town. The old sawmill had been closed for nearly a decade after a devastating fire claimed the lives of its owner, Jeremiah Thornton, and 3 workers. The burned-out shell had been left standing, too costly to rebuild and too dangerous to dismantle safely. On April 23rd, a group of boys playing near the ruins entered the charred remains of the mill office on a dare. There, beneath the collapsed floorboards, they discovered a hidden chamber that had survived the fire intact. Inside were 2 trunks containing women's clothing, jewelry, forged documents, and other items clearly belonging to the Carroll sisters. But it was a 3rd trunk, smaller than the others, that contained the most disturbing find: dozens of glass jars, each containing what appeared to be a single human tooth preserved in alcohol. Each jar was meticulously labeled with a man's name and a date, the earliest dating back to 1883, the most recent bearing the name of Henry Blackwood and the date of his death. When the mill ruins were more thoroughly searched, another hidden chamber was found beneath the main floor. This one contained 2 coffins lined with soil from what was later determined to be a Georgia cemetery. The coffins were empty, but the interiors showed evidence of having been occupied recently. The discovery at the Thornton Mill transformed the investigation. What had seemed a case of fraud culminating in murder now took on elements of ritualistic killing spanning more than a decade. The labeled teeth suggested that the Blackwater Creek deaths were merely the latest in a long series of similar crimes committed across multiple states. "These women have been killing for far longer than we realized," Sheriff Blackwood wrote in his official report to the governor of Texas. "The evidence suggests they target widowers specifically and collect teeth as trophies. Their methodology and the circumstances of their disappearance from custody defy rational explanation." The final piece of the puzzle emerged when authorities managed to match several of the names on the tooth jars to unsolved deaths of widowers in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. All cases where wealthy men had died mysteriously after becoming engaged to previously unknown women. In each instance, property transfers had been discovered after the victim's death, benefiting persons who had promptly disappeared. Eleanor Whitfield's trial began in June 1897 amid unprecedented security. Despite the circumstantial nature of much of the evidence against her, the discovery of the property transfers and her connection to the Carroll sisters seemed to ensure her conviction. Yet on the morning of the trial's third day, the guards arrived at her cell to find it empty. Like the Dawson twins before her, Whitfield had vanished from a locked and guarded cell, leaving behind no evidence of how she had escaped. The only clue was a message scratched into the wall above her cot. "We are three, we are one, we will have our due." In the aftermath of these events, Blackwater Creek was never quite the same. Many families moved away, unwilling to live in a community that had experienced such inexplicable horrors. The properties that had been fraudulently transferred were tied up in legal disputes for years, with many ultimately being acquired by the county due to lack of clear ownership. The Carroll sisters, or the Dawson twins, as they were properly known, were never seen again, at least not in any verifiable way. Yet for decades after their disappearance, reports would occasionally surface from small towns across the South. Stories of elegant twin sisters arriving in communities and showing particular interest in wealthy widowers, only to vanish when authorities began asking questions. And in every location where such sightings were reported, men would be found dead in their beds, unmarked save for a single kiss imprinted on their cheek, their homes filled with the scent of lilies or roses. The most recent confirmed sighting occurred in Natchez, Mississippi in 1932, more than 35 years after the events in Blackwater Creek. Two women matching the description of the Dawson twins, appearing no older than they had in 1897, were reported to have attended a society function where they charmed several elderly widowers. Within a week, 3 of those men were dead. By the time authorities connected the deaths to the legendary kissing killers, the women had vanished. The only evidence of their presence was a property deed transferring a valuable riverfront estate to a woman named Eleanor Carroll, a name that combined elements of their former aliases and their accomplice. The investigation into the Dawson twins and their decades of crime remains officially open, though most of the original files have been lost or destroyed over time. The few surviving documents, along with newspaper accounts and personal journals of those involved, suggest that between 1883 and 1932, they may have been responsible for as many as 67 deaths across 7 southern states. What happened to Mary and Martha Dawson? How did they manage to escape from locked cells? How could they appear not to age over a span of nearly 40 years? And who or what was Eleanor Whitfield, the mysterious woman who served as their accomplice? Some questions may never be answered, but one thing seems certain. The story of the Dawson twins represents one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in American criminal history, a tale of deception, greed, and apparently supernatural malevolence that continues to haunt those who study it. According to local legend, in what was once Blackwater Creek, now absorbed into the larger town of Liberty Hill, the spirits of the Dawson twins still return occasionally to East Texas. Residents claim that on certain nights, particularly during the full moon of December, the scent of lilies and roses can be detected near the old Thornton Mill ruins. Those who have experienced this phenomenon report feeling a sudden chill, as though cold fingers have brushed against their neck. And in the county records office, where property deeds are stored, staff have reported finding documents mysteriously altered overnight, with ownership of certain old properties inexplicably transferred to individuals named Carroll, Dawson, or Whitfield, only to find the documents returned to their original state by morning. Perhaps most disturbing are the reports from the Liberty Hill Cemetery, where the body of Ezekiel Preston lies buried. Caretakers claim that fresh kiss marks occasionally appear on his weathered tombstone, the imprint seemingly made in some substance that looks remarkably like blood but vanishes before it can be properly analyzed. Are these merely urban legends born from a community's historical trauma? Or do Martha and Mary Dawson somehow continue their century? Are these merely urban legends born from a community's historical trauma? Or do Martha and Mary Dawson somehow continue their century-long quest to claim what they believe is rightfully theirs? The answers remain elusive, but one fact stands out in this disturbing tale. To this day, no widower in Liberty Hill will accept courtship from an unknown woman, especially if she happens to wear the scent of lilies or roses. In the years following the Dawson twins' disappearance, historians and paranormal investigators alike have attempted to uncover the truth behind their seemingly impossible abilities. Some theories suggest that the sisters practiced a form of obscure folk magic brought to Georgia by their ancestors, possibly a blend of European witchcraft and African spiritual traditions common in the rural South. Others propose a more mundane explanation, that the twins were master manipulators who created an elaborate mythology around themselves to enhance their effectiveness as con artists. The rumors of supernatural abilities, according to this theory, were deliberately cultivated to distract from their very human methods of theft and murder. The genius of the Dawson twins' operation was in creating a legend that would outlive them, wrote criminologist Dr. James Hargrove in his 1972 analysis of the case. By encouraging beliefs in their supernatural powers, they ensured that people would focus on the impossible elements of their crimes rather than the practical details that might lead to their capture. Yet, this rational explanation fails to account for their documented escapes from locked cells, their apparent agelessness over decades of sightings, or the consistent reports of their distinct perfumes at crime scenes they could not possibly have visited. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Dawson twins' story is how it continues to evolve. In 1957, a prominent oil magnate in Houston was found dead in his bedroom, a perfect kiss mark on his cheek, the room filled with the scent of lilies. The man had recently become engaged to a woman who subsequently vanished. When investigators searched her abandoned apartment, they found a faded photograph that experts later identified as depicting the Dawson twins in their youth. Similar cases have been reported sporadically throughout the 20th century and into the 21st. Each follows the same pattern: wealthy widowers, whirlwind romances with mysterious women, unexplained deaths, and property transfers that are discovered too late. The most recent incident occurred in 2015, when 3 elderly widowers in a retirement community near Dallas died within a week of each other. All had recently befriended a pair of elegant twin sisters who had moved into the community, claiming to be retired school teachers from Georgia. After the deaths, the sisters disappeared, and subsequent investigation revealed that property owned by all 3 men had been transferred to a trust bearing the name Blackwater Holdings. "I never believed those old stories," said Sheriff Raymond Mitchell of Ellis County, who investigated the case. But when we found those kiss marks on the victims and the whole place smelling like some old-fashioned perfume, well, it makes you wonder what's really possible in this world. FBI analysts have suggested that these modern cases are the work of copycats, criminals inspired by the Dawson twins' legend who deliberately mimic the historical details to confuse investigators. This explanation seems plausible for recent incidents, but fails to account for the consistent pattern of similar crimes reported throughout decades when the original case was largely forgotten outside of East Texas. Whatever the truth, the legacy of the Dawson twins, Mary and Martha, also known as Josephine and Annabelle Carroll, serves as a dark reminder of how greed can twist human nature into something barely recognizable as human. Their story continues to be told in hushed voices throughout the South, particularly in small towns where strangers are still regarded with suspicion. It serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing charm to override caution, of trusting too quickly those who seem too perfect. Perhaps most unsettling is the possibility that they are still out there, unchanged by time, continuing their deadly work in communities that have never heard of Blackwater Creek or the Kissing Killers of 1896. If you find yourself in a small town in the American South and encounter elegant twin sisters with perfect manners and the faint scent of lilies or roses, you would be wise to remember this story. And if you are a widower of means, perhaps you should be especially careful about who you invite into your home and your heart. For some predators, time is no obstacle, death no impediment, and locked doors no barrier when they have decided to claim what they believe they are due. As we conclude this dark chapter of American history, remember that some evils never truly die. They simply wait for the right moment to return. The Carroll sisters may be legend now, but legends often contain kernels of truth too disturbing to face directly. In the words allegedly found scratched into the wall of Eleanor Whitfield's cell, "We are three, we are one, we will have our due." And perhaps in some form, they still walk among us, seeking what they believe they deserve. Only through faith in God and Jesus Christ can we find protection from such darkness. Remember that light always conquers shadow, and evil cannot triumph where faith stands strong. Sleep well tonight, but perhaps check your locks twice, and if you detect the faint scent of lilies or roses on the night air, pray that it's only your imagination.